Hello there. This is All 24 News special coverage on the Russia-Ukraine file with me, Krifa Zachary, coming to you live from Algiers. Russia's military operation in Ukraine is making a diplomatic advance and some small military retreats. The European Union yesterday officially made Ukraine a candidate to join the organization, while its military may be pulling back from a city that Ukraine has struggled to defend for weeks. Ukrainian troops were ordered to retreat from Severodonetsk in the eastern Luhansk region, making way for a big win for Russia. The battle for Severodonetsk lasted more than a month. Luhansk Governor Serhiy Hedey said Ukrainian forces needed to withdraw to avoid being surrounded and to set up new fortified positions elsewhere. Russia's capturing of Severodonetsk will bring it closer to complete control of Luhansk and a further advance in the eastern region. Russia said it made headway around the nearby town of Lysychansk. To talk more about these developments and other pressing issues, I am joined live via Skype by Aldo Pigoli, an adjunct professor and general manager at Mastery at Catholic University of Milan, assistant professor of Homeland Security from Italy, and via Zoom from Russia, joining us live is Yuri Golub, a journalist and political analyst. Thank you, gentlemen, for being with us. A short break and we kick off the discussion. And before we delve into any discussion, let's follow this report about the latest development about the Russia-Ukraine battle.
From city to city, the Russian forces are advancing with new victories in eastern Ukraine. The Russians victorious in the Battle of Severodonetsk after the Ukrainian forces received orders to withdraw from the city, as staying there was no longer feasible, according to the governor of Luhansk region.
Different types of troops are at the forefront, but I'm calling those defenders, and this includes the soldiers of the defense forces of Ukraine, the National Guard. They have already received the order to withdraw to new positions, to new fortified territories, and carry out full-scale fights from there and inflict losses on the enemy.
Control of Severodonetsk is very important for Russia to dominate the last Ukrainian-controlled territory in Luhansk, an advance that will transfer the battle to nearby Lysychansk in the Donbas region, as Russian forces are trying to encircle the city, according to the Ukrainian Defense Ministry. In turn, the Russian counterpart reported that Russian armed forces have continued their special military operation in Ukraine, and about 2,000 Ukrainian fighters were trapped in Hirsky, located 20 kilometers south of Severodonetsk.
The armed forces of the Russian Federation continue the special military operation in Ukraine. Bastion Coastal Missile System has launched an attack at the firing position of S-300 air defense missile system near Odessa. The target has been eliminated. Russian air defense means have destroyed 2 Su-25 airplanes in Kharkov region.
The noticeable Russian progress on the fighting front in eastern Ukraine is considered by Americans to be slow and very costly. As for the withdrawal of Ukrainian forces from Severodonetsk, has been considered a repositioning at new points, which would allow Ukrainian fighters to better defend their new positions and target Russian forces.
So let's commence with you, Mr. Golub Yuri. A Ukrainian official says troops are being withdrawn from Severodonetsk because holding these positions, which have just been smashed over many months, doesn't really make any sense. What is this tactical withdrawal of Ukrainian troops according to you? Mr. Yuri, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you. Hello?
Did you hear my question?
Yes, I get it.
Yes.
Of course, the Ukrainian forces trying to save their many military specialists, the fighters, and also their weapon, but they will have a problem with this. Of course, they can withdraw their fighters, but they will be able to leave a lot of weapons there. And the defeat in Severodonetsk the defeat in Severodonetsk will play important political and even more important psychological role. As you said, the Lysychansk, after the defeat in Severodonetsk, Lysychansk is only Luhansk town under Ukrainian occupation, and so the defeat in Lysychansk will have the huge resonance. And also we saw as the Ukrainian Ukrainian Ministry of Defense blamed the so-called Luhansk governor and media that they published the information about this withdrawing, and this fact interfered with this withdrawing. So we see the search of somebody who is guilty in this defeat, because this defeat is really painful for Ukrainian society, and of course the people will looking for guilty, and the Ministry of Defense will try to take over the responsibility for this situation.
Mm-hmm. Professor Aldo, according to you, granting that we can't really predict anything with any reliability, there is still a sense of where the trend lines are going, where things are heading. Where is this war going after 4 months, in your opinion?
Yes, good afternoon to everybody, and thanks for inviting me.
Thanks.
Well, it's quite difficult, as you said, to try to draw a line regarding the future developments. After 4 months, we have seen different evolutions, beginning with the battle for Kiev and the successful withdrawal of Russian forces from the point of view of Kiev and Ukraine, and also from the NATO countries supporting Ukraine. Then we had regional evolution in the Donbass, and as my colleague has just told a few minutes before me, the situation is going to become more and more in support of the Russian plans to get the control of the Donbass region, military control of the Donbass region. Now, I think we have to consider that everything is in evolution from the military point of view. The withdrawal of Ukraine forces is to be considered something both linked to strategy and tactics. Mm-hmm. And I think we cannot judge this, what happened in the recent weeks, as something that will be take for granted for the future. The situation is evolving. What I think is important is the political message that we have to consider, the political issues, because if Ukraine is withdrawing from Donbass, as it is, from Donbass, Luhansk, etc., at the same time is getting some victories when it comes to the external support it is receiving. And what happened recently with the EU decision to open the door to the Ukraine accession process. And so I think we have to take into consideration both elements when it comes to try to define what will be future evolution in the region.
You just spoke about the accession of Ukraine into the EU bloc, which is just symbolic, politically symbolic, and seeing the nature of EU bloc, which is quite economic. How is this going to really serve Ukraine while it's still losing on the battlefield, according to you?
Well, a tough issue, because if we consider only military aspect, we don't have to look at EU, but at the NATO approach to the Ukraine crisis. So what NATO is deciding, has decided, and what the NATO countries will do in terms of providing weapons. And you know, there is a strong debate within the single NATO countries when it comes to should we provide weapons to Ukraine? Is it going to change the situation? Is it going to stop the war or not? And there's a strong political debate, for example, in Italy, that is bringing it to tough times when it comes to the prime minister capacity to hold the government together. From the EU point of view, Ukraine can be helped, as you mentioned, in a symbolic way. The fact that the EU countries decided to open the doors to Ukraine officially brings to Moscow and to Kiev a strong signal. But when it comes to military developments, well, I think we have to divide the issues, because not all the EU members are NATO members, not all the NATO members are EU members. And even, for example, Sweden and Finland are asking to join the NATO. It will take time, and I think it's related with other issues rather than only the Ukraine crisis. So I think we have to go a bit into depth to try to understand the significance and the role of such events and developments in order to better understand the evolution in Ukraine.
And Mr. Yuri Gulub, regarding the substantial amount of help, financially speaking, to Ukraine, we see that across the EU bloc, a lot of residents, a lot of average, citizens are complaining about the substantial amount of money that is being sent to Ukraine, while domestically there are a lot of problems that should be addressed, especially their own direct problems. What's your comment on that?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question, please?
I said a lot of, the average citizens across the EU bloc are complaining about this substantial amount of financial help that is being sent to Ukraine on daily basis. Every single time we see a country that is revealing about a substantial amount of money that is going to be sent to Ukraine, while there are a lot of domestic problems that should be addressed first, especially the ones that the average citizen can sense directly. What's your comment on that? Mr. Yuri, perhaps Aldo Pigoli can answer us.
Of course, the conflict in the Ukraine is really heavy for Russian economy, but is not so is not so heavy as
Yes, Mr. Aldo Pigoli, can you answer my question, please? Waiting for Mr. Yuri Gulub.
Well, I think it's a key issue, because after 4 months of conflicts, the situation is in a stalemate. We don't see any positive evolution when it comes to peace and ceasefire, etc., etc. And what the taxpayers across Europe are wondering is what is the significance, what is the result of our efforts in times when we are experiencing the critical evolution of the inflation situation, when we are looking at what will be the evolution this winter when it comes to the energy situation, and when it comes also to the food crisis. All the world is experiencing that is also producing problems for those countries in Europe that have the most critical economic situations, like
Mr.
those in the
Aldo
Mediterranean
Pigoli, speaking of food crisis and the inflation that Europe or the West in general is experiencing, some analysts have raised the questions that the West is mainly responsible for that and on the sanctions that they have actually imposed on Russia. How far is this true, according to you?
Well, again, it's not simple to answer this question. I think that the most of the responsibility is upon the Russian shoulders when it comes to the fact that Russia invaded Ukraine and is waging war to Ukraine. That's a point, of course. But at the same time, we can discuss about the sanctions and how they can be effective in stopping Russia doing this. I think we should move towards another level of negotiation and discussion, because as the recent BRICS summit revealed, countries like China, which are so relevant at the international level, do not accept the idea of sanctions as a positive element when it comes to stabilize the Ukraine situation, and when it comes to solve the international issues and problems like the food crisis we are witnessing. So I think the Western world should consider this when it comes to put pressure on Moscow, using only and strongly the economic and financial sanctions that have also a negative impact on other countries, mainly the poorest countries around the world.
Yes. What about you, Mr. Yuri Gulub? How effective do you think the sanctions are against Russia, taking into consideration that they take time to actually take a toll effect? That's on the one hand. And on the other hand, seeing the repercussion that it gave, or let's say the backfiring that it had upon the West Bloc in general?
Of course, this sanctions has some effect, and it's it's a real challenge for Russian economy, and it now Russian government and Russian business will try to find another trade connections and
I mean, do you feel the effect perhaps taking a toll in your own country? Do you feel the inflation? I mean, as a direct result of this war and the sanctions in particular?
Of course, the inflation is quite large, but we see that such inflation also is in the European countries and even in the USA, but of course it's low because it's their economical reality. So this situation is harmful for both of the sides, and it's difficult to say who will suffer more.
Moving on, regarding the EU accession, tens of thousands of Georgians resumed pro-EU rallies in the capital Tbilisi in front of Parliament building. Protesters demanded the resignation of the Prime Minister after the country was not given candidate status by the European Union, while making Ukraine and Moldova candidates for EU membership.
I respect European values. This is about the independence of the judiciary and freedom from oligarchy. The rule of one man must be eliminated from our country.
Professor Aldo Pigoli, few took it seriously when Georgia's ruling party promised to formally apply for EU membership in 2024, but then events pushed them to apply even earlier. Is Georgia ready here, and why are we being biased here? It seems that as though symbolically we want Ukraine to join and we see Moldova being accepted, but Georgia not. Why do you think?
Well, I think we have to consider the issue under two focal points. The first one is about the internal Georgian evolution in terms of the capacity of the Georgian political, social, and economic system to fulfill what is asked by Brussels in order to have a proper accession process and enter into the EU in the future. And this is not easy. It takes time. It takes a lot of will, because the Georgian political and economic system, as those of other countries asking to Brussels to enter the EU, are quite different from those of the EU system. And this brings to the issue of the political confrontation within Georgia, when it comes to set everything right properly in order to have the accession program and process going on. But at the same time, and this is the second element, we have to consider that the Ukraine crisis has given a political significance, an higher political significance to the accession to the EU, and also to the accession to NATO. And for example, there are countries like North Macedonia and Albania, that since North Macedonia is more than a decade and Albania is nearly a decade, that are working to access the EU, and they are not yet succeeded in it. So for Ukraine, it will take time. Of course, we will have to see the end of the war, etc., but it will take time, because Ukraine, before the crisis, I'm talking about what happened between 2013, 2014, so because the beginning of the entire crisis was not yet ready to access properly to the European Union. And I don't think that everything has changed so dramatically since then. So the problem is that Ukraine will have to work a lot to fulfill everything that will be asked that is asked from Brussels. It will be helped. Kiev will be helped. But at the same time, Brussels should take care.
But how willing do you think the EU bloc is actually to help Ukraine, especially that it is a war-torn country and with completely, let's say, collapsed economic background in comparison to other countries such as Turkey, who applied like a long time ago, and they have worked on all the criteria. Yet again, there was this fear of human rights and for the democracy to actually deteriorate, while we see the corruption problem in Ukraine is really highlighted there, and not to mention the treason problem that they had, which made many NATO countries and the US atop actually to provide them with arms, saying that perhaps it would fall within the wrong hands, and perhaps Russia could use the technology against the West. What's your comment on that?
Yes. Well, I completely agree with your points, in the sense that we should consider it from a realistic point of view. Before the 24th of February, the evolution of the Ukraine accession to EU was just, a dream, nothing more. And I don't think that concretely something has changed since then, if not politically. Politically, everything has changed because of the crisis. But Ukraine is not yet ready to access EU to fulfill all the elements required to be part of the European Union. But at the same time, the problem is that it's not only Ukrainian problem. The problem is up to Brussels, when it has to consider Georgia, it has to consider North Macedonia, it has to consider Albania, and all those countries that are willing to enter into the European Union system, but they still take time to complete all the process. Okay. And I wouldn't like, as a EU citizen, I wouldn't like to see a situation where somebody will be helped because of the crisis and somebody will have to pay for this too much. So I think it's a matter of balance, of try to find a good balance when it comes to took care of all those actors that are asking to enter into the EU, and we have to manage it properly.
Very nice indeed. And Mr. Yuri Gulub, how far do you agree with the statement that says Europe's unity over the war in Ukraine is at risk as public attention increasingly shifts from the battlefield to cost of living concerns? A survey in 9 EU member states found that despite strong support across Europe for Ukraine's bid to join the EU and the West's policy of cutting ties with Moscow, many voters in Europe want the war to end as soon as possible, even if that means Ukraine losing more territory. What are you saying about that? Mr. Yuri Gulub?
Yes. Of course, Ukraine can. It's difficult to play in this variant because the losing of territory will play the fatal role for this Kiev government. I can't imagine how Zelensky can present these this entrance from the conflict. Because I don't sure that I'm not sure that the entry into the European Union will be so the same price as the price of losing.
All right, clear, Mr. Yuri Gulub. Moving on, in the high-level dialogue on global development, the Russian President Vladimir Putin defended Russia's position in the food crisis in front of some 15 African and Asian leaders. Let's follow.
This is not the result of the last months, and even more the consequences of Russia's special military operation to protect the Donbass. A sharp rise in inflation did not occur yesterday. It is the result of recent years of irresponsible macroeconomic policy of G7 countries. Some Western countries use such cynicism to address these issues, destabilizing the global market for agricultural production.
Back to you, Mr. Aldo Pigoli. I mean, beyond just the value of the ruble, which is actually doing quite well, how is the Russian economy doing 4 months into the war? Are ordinary Russians feeling the impact of sanctions yet? And has their life dramatically changed? That's not what we see when we see reports about Russia. And why does Russia matter for global energy supplies here?
Well, I think we have to consider the evolution in the future, as it was said before, because in the short time, Russia is not suffering because it has billions of revenues coming from oil and gas, the oil and gas sector. So it's not a matter of the first part of the conflict. Is just a matter to understand what will be the future. And the Russian system is, unfortunately for Russia, a kind of system that is too much dependent on commodities. And most of the countries around the world, including China, including many Middle Eastern countries, not only the Western world, are moving or have been moving toward a kind of economic system based on diversification. The role of the primary sector is relevant, but is relevant to develop manufacturing, is relevant to develop services, to develop technological development. And Russia has been remaining blocked to a kind of economic model that, internally speaking, is not providing alternatives in times of crisis like the one we are witnessing now. They are witnessing now. And from the external point of view, Russia is not, let me pass this word, is not so economically sexy to countries that are trying to develop economic relation with Russia. Because the Russian model is not helping the countries with which Moscow is having businesses, investments, and trade to develop an independent economic model. On the short term, in the short time, this won't be relevant, but in the middle to the long term, this will be of paramount relevance. And the Western world, USA at first, are very aware of this point. And they are using this element to put pressure on Russia from many points of view.
Thank you so much, Mr. Adolopigoli. Thank you, Mr. Yuri Golup. We have reached the end of our special coverage for the Russia-Ukraine file for today. Stay tuned for other editions coming to you live from All 24 News with me, Karim Fazakari. That's the end for now. Bye-bye.